Okay, we will get this show started. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm Cindy Erickson, Tour Coordinator with Westworld Tours, and I'll be facilitating the presentation this evening. Joining me to tell you all about the great sights you're going to see on this wonderful tour to Churchill is our Tour Director, Koral Romanchuk. Welcome, Koral.
Good evening, everyone. So happy you're here joining us tonight.
And we appreciate you joining us as well, Koral. Thank you again. Koral, who lives in Churchill for part of the year, I'm sure there's nobody out there that knows Churchill better than Koral, and we are so happy that she's able to do our tour for us up to Churchill. So again, with that, before I turn the presentation over to Koral, I do have a few things that I would like to go over with you, and then I will turn it over to Koral, and she will share you all the information on Churchill. First off, questions. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time throughout the presentation. That being said, we do have everybody on mute. So we ask you to type your question, please, into the Q&A box that's located on your screen. And if you have joined us on Facebook, please type your questions into the comment section on Facebook. And we welcome all of your questions, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Our upcoming presentations, here we go. 7:00 p.m. Central Standard Time. We are going to do a presentation on our Maritimes tour, our all coach tour, and that's going to be May 10th. And Koral will be joining us again that evening to tell us all about the Maritimes. So just a little bit about Westworld Tours. As Western Canada's premier tour company, Westworld Tours has been serving Canadians from coast to coast throughout the world in North America since 2000. And we present quality components, including modern, comfortable coaches, professional tour directors, experienced, courteous drivers, baggage handling, and excellent accommodations. We take in all the important sights and attractions and include several meals throughout. Thousands of passengers have chosen our first-class style of touring, enjoying the great value, security, and stress-free environment, all while making new friends along the way. We know our tour directors enjoy getting to know you while on tour and love to see your familiar faces. And speaking about this, I'm going to launch a poll onto your screen now, asking how many of you have traveled with Westworld Tours before. So here we go. Unfortunately, for those on Facebook, you won't be able to see the poll. It won't pop up, but you can certainly just type a quick comment and let us know whether you've traveled with us before or not. So I'll just give everybody a couple seconds here to answer the question here on the survey. It looks like everybody has done so. Thank you very much. And right now it looks like we have 60% watching this evening have traveled with us before. So that's awesome. I know that we look forward to welcoming you on board again soon. And 40% have not traveled with us yet. And I know Koral and all of our tour directors would love to welcome you on board. So thank you for participating in that. So our Churchill tour is going August 7th to the 13th for this coming summer. We do still have some space available. It is filling up quickly. And we invite you to join us on our bucket list adventure to Churchill, Manitoba, which is the polar bear and beluga whale capital of the world. And before I turn it over, actually, I'm going to turn it over to Koral here right away, and she can share with you her knowledge and experience in Churchill. So again, I'm pleased to introduce you to Koral Romanchuk. Koral has been with Westworld Tours for 20 years, having traveled the globe extensively. She's set foot on all 7 continents, bringing to her role as Senior Tour Director with Westworld Tours a wealth of knowledge and experience. And last time we did our presentation on Churchill, Koral was actually calling in live from Churchill, but this time she's here with us in Saskatchewan. So welcome, Koral.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be here with you, as I was saying earlier, everyone. And yes, coming to you from my second home in Saskatchewan tonight.
Well, thank you for being here. So share with us everything you've got to tell us about Churchill. I'm excited to hear it all.
Well, that's wonderful, because I'm excited to be sharing with you.
Good.
Churchill is a really special place to me, everyone. And again, welcome those of you who I've had the pleasure of traveling with, those of you who traveled with Westworld, and also very much tonight, a special welcome to those of you that haven't traveled with us before. We're so happy to have you joining us for our presentation tonight. Let me give you just a little bit of a background, first of all, how a prairie girl like myself comes to be living in a little town like Churchill. I do still own a home in Saskatchewan, and that's where I am tonight. I'm proud to be a prairie born and raised, definitely, but I have had a very deep love for Churchill for a long, long time. I really am a northern girl at heart, and I have been for a long time. I went to Churchill with my parents for the first time when I was quite young, back in the summer of 1991. And I always say I felt like I was changed from that very first day. I was completely mesmerized by this very special place from my very first day setting foot there. I have had the pleasure of working with Westworld since 2001 as a guide. And off season, when I'm not guiding tours for Westworld, I have since 1999, so going on for 24 years now, worked as a local guide in Churchill. So I started contracting there for local tour companies a number of years ago. And finally, just a few years ago, I actually married a local born and raised Churchillian. So that kind of stepped it up to a whole new level for me. So our primary home is up in Churchill. And I do still spend some of my time down in Saskatchewan as well. So that's my background, how a prairie girl ends up living in the north. But I am really excited to be telling you about Westworld's Churchill Tour tonight, everyone. And I'm really excited too that our Canadian tours have been selling really well. A lot of interest in our Canadian destinations for sure. Churchill really is a hidden gem in Canada. And I'll talk more about that in a short while. But first of all, let's have a look at this nice little map that Cindy has up for us. This is a really great map. Starting on the right-hand side of the screen tonight, we're seeing the journey up to Churchill that we make on the tour. So this is really just a nice little getaway in August. It's just a week-long tour. So, you know, not too long to be away from the garden and from everything that's going on at home in the summer, but just a nice 7-day getaway. We pick up in Regina and Saskatoon. We overnight in the Paw, both going up to Churchill and again on the way home as well. And then we have a night on the train. So we actually board the train in Thompson. So driving up from the Paw to Thompson, that's roughly about a 4-hour drive. Fairly remote stretch of highway, but I drive it quite often. I can tell you the highway is actually in pretty good shape. And there's a beautiful place to stop between the Paw and Thompson called Pichu Falls. We stop there, and then the last roughly 14-15 hours, kind of depending on the train, how it's doing for time. It's about a 14 or slightly more hour-long journey from Thompson up to Churchill. We'll talk more about that train journey shortly as well. If you look over on the top left of the screen, you're seeing where Churchill sits on the shores of Hudson Bay. Churchill is virtually surrounded by water because we're also sitting on the estuary of the Churchill River. So it's really, you can see how wide the river gets, very narrow at its mouth. And then if you're looking over the left-hand side of your screen, it's a very large river estuary where that freshwater river, one of the longest river systems in Canada, in fact, is draining into the Hudson Bay. And then looking on the lower left of the screen, that's actually a town map. So you can see the grid, how the town is laid out. Really rich history in Churchill. Interestingly enough, all the streets in Churchill named for famous explorers or men who were involved in one way or another in northern exploration. And the grid of the town as it looks today has just existed since the 1970s. Prior to that, there was a very large military base in Churchill. When the military base closed down, the town began to change, and that's when the grid of the town was established as it looks today. So that's just a little look at the journey and of the town side as well. Speaking of the train ride, we've got a couple good shots of the train here. That's actually a really lovely shot on the bottom right-hand side of the dome car. You have a chance to go sit up in the dome car if you wish to on the journey. You know, the train is actually a really big deal for a lot of people. Now, I've had people tell me they didn't enjoy the train ride, but it really is all about the journey. And I personally love it. And the reason I love it, well, for one thing, it's forced relaxation. You have nothing to do but chat with your fellow travelers, look out the window and enjoy the scenery. Or just read a book and take it all in. I think it's absolutely lovely, but it is a slow journey up to Churchill. And that's why some people find it a bit tedious. But some people, their whole trip to Churchill is just based around taking the train. And a lot of people do love to take a good train ride. And this is a good train ride for sure. You're going to see a lot of different types of scenery on the journey up. You'll leave the, leave the farmland behind. You'll be passing through boreal forest. And then finally, as you get close to Churchill, you're in what we call the land of little sticks, the taiga. So it's really interesting to watch the scenery change. I mentioned Pishu Falls, which is a stop for us on that journey from the Pas up to Thompson. It's actually not that far from Thompson. It's a little less than 1 hour from Thompson on that 4-hour journey between the two towns, but it's absolutely gorgeous. So it's a really nice shot of Pishu Falls. So a good chance to stretch your legs, maybe have a little juice and cookie break and just enjoy the beautiful scenery. Thompson, kind of a frontier northern city, known for its wolves, wolf statues, wolf murals. That is an absolutely gorgeous mural, just kind of on the edge of town. So really lovely mural in Thompson. And again, everyone, that will be our jumping off point to get on the train for the journey up to Churchill, where your adventure begins. And now we have arrived in Churchill. So when the train's on time, the train gets in roughly around 9:30 in the morning. We're pretty accustomed to the train arriving any hour, basically between 9 and noon in Churchill. You're traveling over what we call a discontinuous permafrost. And that is actually why the train ride is so slow up to Churchill. So yes, the train will travel quite slowly over top of the permafrost. And myself, I'm actually going to be your local guide when you arrive in Churchill. So I'll be looking for the Westworld group to be arriving off the train. And that's actually a really nice picture of the platform, as we call it, and the train station in Churchill up in the top right-hand corner of the screen. The train station, I think we have another picture later on, so I'll elaborate on it then, but it's a lovely old heritage building, fully restored in Churchill. Top left-hand corner of the screen, you see a statue of a polar bear. I'll talk more about polar bears in Churchill in a little while, but there's lots of really nice signage around Churchill, cool statues as well, polar bears and Nookshook and everything else, just for visitors to take pictures of. So that's a really good photo opportunity of the polar bear statue with, I don't know if you can see it very well, but the river is actually just behind that polar bear statue there. And that is a really nice shot of the town itself, a good aerial view. Looking in that shot, everybody, on the bottom lower left of your screen, you're looking at the town site, some of the Precambrian rocky coastline in the foreground, and that's the grain port at the very back of the shot there, with the river right behind it, and then way off in the distance, actually the Hudson Bay behind that. Churchill, right around 800 people roughly who live there. It's very much a fluctuating population. When the military were in full force starts in Churchill, there were up to around 6,000 people living there. Today, it's somewhere around 800 residents in Churchill. And then finally, in this shot here, look at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. That is very typical of what the trees look like in Churchill. I mentioned the land of little sticks, or a word called taiga, T-A-I-G-A. Taiga is transitional between boreal forest, which is predominantly a lot of black spruce and tamarack, and actual tundra, which means treeless plain. So Churchill isn't quite far enough north. On the 58th degree of latitude, by the way, is where we are. Not quite far enough north to be in actual tundra. We're in the taiga, the land of little sticks. They're like little bonsai trees, and they're absolutely adorable. They're very, very photogenic, and most of these tiny trees are just, yeah, they're very, very old, into the hundreds of years old, believe it or not. And most of them maybe no more than 4 or 5 feet tall, and they're stunted white spruce. You see how there's branches only on one side of the tree. It's just a really good example of prevailing winds, winds coming out of the north and causing what we call crumb holes effect on the trees. All right, in this shot here, we are looking in the top left-hand corner at, I always describe it as the most iconic building in the whole Churchill area. The locals in Churchill simply call this the bear jail. Its proper name is the Polar Bear Holding Facility. And I know it must sound very odd that in Churchill we have a bear jail, but indeed we do. It is basically a building where problem polar bears are held until they can be released on the ice in the fall. We will have with our Westworld group a full what we call town and area tour of Churchill. Sometimes we end up splitting it up over a couple of days during your stay, just depending on the itinerary. Everything can be dependent on the tides, when the boat tour is going to happen, all that sort of thing. So we fit everything into your town and area tour, but very likely it will happen over a couple of days during your stay. Regardless, one of the highlights of the town and area tour is a chance for you to see this iconic polar bear holding facility, or bear jail. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we're not allowed to take visitors inside of it. As a local guide in Churchill, I carry pictures to show you what it looks like on the inside, but really and truly, it's not there for tourism at all. It's there for the polar bear's safety. And so that's why the natural resources officers very, very rarely let anyone inside of the building who isn't actually working with natural resources. This building has actually saved the lives of a lot of bears. And instead of polar bears being shot and killed in Churchill, as they were many years ago, now they're detained. And then once the ice is forming on the bay, they're simply flown out of the Churchill area. So it sounds odd, but it's really interesting. And yeah, it's a pretty fascinating facility. You notice too that beautiful mural on the building. And of course, you'll have an opportunity on your visit to Churchill to take a picture of that as well too. I'll talk about the murals a little bit later on, but we have a lot of murals around Churchill, and this one called Peace and Circumstance is absolutely one of the favorites, both of visitors to Churchill and of locals as well too. So on the top right hand corner of the screen, we're looking out by the Inukshuk statue on the beach and looking, you know, into the Hudson Bay. So you can walk to the beach from your hotel in Churchill in 5, if you walk really slow, maybe about 7 minutes walking only to the beach. So it is a subarctic beach, that's for sure, but it's a beautiful beach nonetheless. In the center at the bottom of the screen, everyone, you're looking at another thing that we're going to visit on your town and area tour. It's a little bit of local history, some you know, folklore, you could say, in Churchill, but it's actually an incredible true story, in fact, too. It's the story of Miss Piggy, and that's Miss Piggy in the center of the screen. It's an old C-46 freight plane that came down in the rocks just outside of Churchill back in November 1979. No fatalities on board. And the story, I won't get into it now for the sake of time, but you're going to hear all about it when you're in Churchill, and it's an absolutely remarkable story, really nothing short of miraculous, what happened with Miss Piggy and how she came to be there in the rocks. And then finally, in this slide, just before we move on, Cindy, we're looking at a couple of shots of the grain port in Churchill. So 2 good shots there. It sits just a few minutes drive outside of town. And there is a possibility we may be able to get you inside for a tour. We're going to try our best this summer to see if we can get you in. But the truth of the matter is it's actually closed right now. So we'll see if we can pull some strings still and get you inside. But the port was actually closed all of 2021, and it's scheduled to be closed all of 2022. Reason being track repairs. And that's something that's kind of a constant. Again, I mentioned it before, but this discontinuous permafrost can really wreak havoc with the track. And so always in a state of repair. And that is why the port is currently closed. But we might be able to get you inside. And seeing that port, even seeing it from the outside, is really a big deal to a lot of our guests and folks coming up from the prairies, very much with an agricultural background, and it's nice to have a chance to actually see the Port of Churchill. Moving on to this slide, everyone, you're looking at one of my absolute favorite places in Churchill. Just as we were starting our presentation, I mentioned that I really felt like I was changed by Churchill the very first time I went there when I was young, back in 1991. I think this is the spot where that actually happened to me. I remember being out at this spot where the Churchill River meets the Hudson Bay on a summer day, and the water was sapphire blue, and those beautiful whales were rising for breath out there in the river estuary, and I was absolutely enchanted. This spot is called Cape Mary, and we will of course be visiting this during your stay in Churchill. Quite likely we'll visit this the day you arrive in Churchill. It's one of 3 National Historic Sites that we have. 2 of the National Historic Sites are across the river. One of them you're absolutely going to have a chance to tour. That is Fort Prince of Wales. But you're also going to have a chance to tour where the old gun battery was. And that is at Cape Mary. That's what you're looking at here. So it's a gorgeous spot. In fact, it looks a lot like Peggy's Cove. I'm sure there's some of you listening tonight who have been to Peggy's Cove. And picture Peggy's Cove with a few hundred less people walking in the rocks, and without that big lighthouse, and you've pretty much got Cape Mary. So lovely spot. There's actually an old gun battery there. One of the original cannon is still at Cape Mary, and also a cairn. If you see that cairn in the rocks on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, that commemorates a Danish expedition that overwintered in Churchill the winter of 1619-1620, the Jens Munch expedition. There is so much history in Churchill. You history lovers who are listening this evening, you're going to love it. I'm a huge history buff, and the history in Churchill is utterly fascinating. Some of those stories pertaining to the Hudson Bay Company, some of those stories pertaining to the search for the Northwest Passage, like the story of Jens Munch and his overwintering back in the early 1600s. So just incredible. It really is. Speaking of incredible wildflowers in the summer too. So, oh, that's fine, Cindy. That's okay. You had a close up there in the last slide of the fireweed. But if we look now at the bottom left-hand corner on this slide, you're looking at a whole field of fireweed. Excuse me while I have a sip of my tea. We have an incredible array of wildflowers that grow in Churchill throughout the summer. It is a very short growing season in Churchill, as you can imagine. It is a 58th degree of latitude, but it is also subarctic in Churchill. It's not true Arctic in Churchill. Our average annual temperature is just a little bit too warm to be pure Arctic. So we are subarctic in Churchill, but it is a short and glorious summer. Generally by early to mid-August, the last of the wildflowers are finishing up, and then the landscape turns scarlet red. So our fall foliage doesn't happen on the trees like it does out east. It happens on the ground. So it's equally gorgeous by late summer and early fall. But that is a field of fireweed blooming in front of Prince of Wales Fort. So this is another of the National Historic Sites in Churchill that you will have a chance to visit. And it's really only accessible in the summer and in the summer alone because it's across the river. So you really require that boat tour to get across the river, where the fort is actually manned by Parks Canada staff all through July and August. That fort, Prince of Wales Fort, is absolutely massive. The walls of the fort are 16 feet high and 40 feet thick. They really, truly are. And that fort fell without one shot ever being fired from any of its 42 cannon. And all the cannon are still there. So again, it's an amazing story that I can't get into for the sake of time tonight. But Samuel Hearne was the governor that day when the fort fell back in the month of August in 1782 without one shot ever being fired. So it's really quite a story. The fort was very, very much, to a great deal, it was destroyed at that time in 1782, but some restoration projects have brought it back up to where it is today, and it truly is impressive. So we'll be going across river for a tour of the fort. And if you look in the center of the screen, everyone, we are looking at a boat called the Sea North 2, and that is the very boat that you will be on our summer trip to Churchill. So whale watching in Churchill is absolutely extraordinary. I think this is as good a time as any to talk about that. This is definitely going to be one of the highlights of your visit to Churchill, is going out there into the river estuary to watch the whales. Now, I say that specifically because the whale watching boats rarely go right into the Hudson Bay. The water is very rough, usually, in the Hudson Bay, and the water is calmer in the river estuary. And that's why the whale watching boats are there. And frankly, that's why there's so many whales in the river estuary as well. And I wish I could get into a lot of fun facts about belugas, and I can't for the sake of time, but I'll just tell you one little tidbit. Belugas can actually adapt between the saltwater Hudson Bay and that freshwater Churchill River estuary. And that's just one of the many, many amazing things about beluga whales. I have had people say to me over the years, I feel like I can walk across their backs. And some days you're out there whale watching, and that's what it feels like. There are just so many beluga whales in Churchill in the summertime. Between 3,000 and 5,000 whales come here.
Wow.
To their calves in that warmer water of the river estuary, and also feeding on small fish called capelin. And honestly, some days it feels like they're people watching just as much as we're whale watching. So you're absolutely going to love your whale watching trip in Churchill. And just before we carry on to the next slide, Cindy, a couple more things. Let's have a look, everyone, at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You can see a rather dirty looking polar bear in that shot there. And that's how they often look in the summertime. Their coats are not quite as pristine looking as we see them in the fall. But that is what we call a summer bear. So the polar bears are around in the summer. They're much, much harder to find in the summer. I say that because towards the end of the year, they begin getting way more active as the ice is ready to form on the Hudson Bay. In the summertime, they're a little more lethargic, but we're always watching for bears, and you definitely do have a chance of seeing bears in Churchill. As local guides, we're trying our best all the time. And I'll tell you a funny little tip about finding bears in Churchill in the summer as a local guide. Well, you might see one on the bus tour, and you might see one when you're out on the big polar rover, but you also have a fairly decent chance of seeing a polar bear when you're on the boat. And the reason I say that, the bears are often hanging out in those big rocks along the coastline, just taking advantage of that wind, keeping bugs off their faces, and just enjoying that cool breeze coming off the Hudson Bay. So we may be lucky enough even to see a polar bear while we're on the Sea North 2 boat during your stay. And then finally, one more thing, the Sanitac Museum in Churchill. There's just a kind of a small shot there on the far right center of the screen. Up until maybe 3-4 years ago, it was called the Eskimo Museum. It has been renamed the Sanitac Museum, Things of the Past or Things of Old. It is absolutely delightful. And this is, of course, something that you will have a chance to tour during your stay in Churchill. I am in love with that museum. I have been in love with that place for years and years. And it is considered to be one of the finest collections of Inuit artwork in the world. Not only that, you have that big stuffed polar bear you can see in the shot. There's a stuffed walrus, a muskox, all kinds of incredible things in that little museum. So we will definitely be touring the Sanitac Museum as well.
Won't be one too many.
All right. Well, this is nice, everyone. We're looking at some of the wildlife that we will be watching for during your stay in Churchill. And you could get lucky and see any of these things while we're out in the Polar Rover. I'll talk more about the rover in just a minute, but let's carry on to talking about wildlife first of all. You are going to see beluga whales during your stay for sure. That is just something they're everywhere in the summer. You definitely have a chance of seeing polar bears. We'll be watching for bears everywhere we go during your stay in Churchill. You see those bald eagles in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We see lots of bald eagles in Churchill, so we'll be on the lookout for those. Sometimes we see golden eagles as well, too. What we don't have on this slide here is Arctic hare, but sometimes even the summertime we see Arctic hare. They're big, they're a lot bigger than a rabbit. The Arctic hare are about the size of a small dog, so we'll be watching for those as well. Like the Arctic fox, they are in a brownish gray coloration for summer. That's an Arctic fox that you're looking at in the bottom center of your screen in its summer colors. So yeah, we do have a lot of Arctic fox as well as red fox, by the way, around Churchill. Caribou, we see them not every day, got to be a little bit luckier, but we could see caribou possibly during your stay. And the really elusive one, you got to be lucky to see it, and that is the elusive snowy owl. And every once in a while we do see snowy owls in Churchill, so you might be some of the lucky ones that get to see a snowy owl. We're going to do a half-day rover tour during your stay. The big buggies and the rovers go out onto the land in what we call the wildlife management area. It's actually an area that's by permit only, so private vehicles are not allowed to go into the area that we'll be in on that rover tour, but we'll be out there in a half-day tour. If you're wondering why that would be the case, they want to keep vehicle traffic off of this pristine landscape, which is basically, it's there for the bears. And so it's only the big rovers and buggies that have permits that are allowed to go out there. So we'll watch for bears, we'll watch for other wildlife, we'll be enjoying the subarctic landscape, looking at a lot of bird life, possibly tundra swans. That's another one I forgot to mention, lots of common ravens as well. So we'll have a fantastic half-day tour on the rover as well. This shot here, everyone, is just a shot looking around town. Let's start in the center of our screen, up at the top. That is actually a really nice picture now of the train station that you'll be arriving at in Churchill. And it's just around the corner from the hotel where you'll be staying at, no more than a 5-minute walk from the hotel. Your hotel, by the way, is very, very centrally located. So good restaurants, it's actually good restaurants in Churchill, there is. So 3 restaurants, very, very easy walk, and another one about a 10-minute walk from the hotel. So lots of restaurants around. Train station, very, very close. It houses Parks Canada Interpretive Center inside, something you might want to have a look at during your free time in Churchill too. And that train station opened back in 1929. And by the way, everyone, that's the same year that the railroad track arrived in Churchill, 1929. And then the grain port opened 2 years after that in 1931. But back in the early 2000s, completed by 2002, Parks Canada took over the train station. They own it now, and they did a full refurbishment of the building. So it is absolutely gorgeous, but it is a heritage building in the province of Manitoba, and a lovely building dating back to 1929. If you look over, let's just scoot over to the left-hand side of the screen right now. Looking at the left-hand side, we're looking at Caribou Hall. It's one of two halls in Churchill. We have Métis Hall as well, too. A lot of Métis folk living in Churchill. And then Caribou Hall is the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides Hall in Churchill. We don't really have a lot of totem poles in Churchill. That's not a big part of the culture in this part of the subarctic, not like it is, over on the West Coast, places like Haida Gwaii, where we see a lot of totem poles. We have one in Churchill, and it's in front of Caribou Hall. So you'll see that. Beautiful landscape picture. Looks like a nice sunset picture there, I believe, at the bottom of the screen. And then going over to the right-hand side, we're looking at a couple of the pretty log buildings, some log architecture in Churchill. In the top on the right-hand side of the screen, we're looking at a cute little gift shop. They operate a dog sledding operation. That's Wapusk General Store. And then below it on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, we're looking at, sorry, I got those two mixed up. That's Wapusk in the bottom. Up at the top is the Lazy Bear Lodge and Cafe. So one of the several hotels, by the way, 7 hotels in Churchill. So that just goes to show you how important tourism is in Churchill. That is definitely the #1 basis of the local economy in Churchill is tourism. So only about 800 people and 7 hotels, plus several bed and breakfasts as well. So that's a really pretty little cafe and restaurant, the Lazy Bear. So yeah, economy in Churchill, tourism #1. Of course, the grain port has been very important to Churchill's economy in years past. And surprisingly, perhaps to some people, healthcare is another one of the components of Churchill's economy, with folks flying down south to Churchill from the subarctic up in Nunavut territory. And that's why healthcare is also significant to the local economy of Churchill. All right, and this is nice, this shot here. This is Leanne from Westworld, our GM, on her vacation to Churchill just a couple summers ago. So yeah, this shot of Leanne there on the top left of the screen. It's actually a really good shot, everyone, to show you just what you too can be doing, dipping your feet in the Hudson Bay. So I mentioned that the beach was, a 5 to, well, definitely less than a 10-minute walk. What a 5, maybe 7-minute walk from the front door of the hotel. Now, mind you, I should stress to you, and believe me, you're going to hear this in Churchill, you have to be very, very careful on the beach, because there's always a chance of seeing a polar bear anytime, anywhere. But your chances are lower midday and lower in the summertime than they are late in the year. So it is safer to walk on the beach, and you certainly will have the opportunity to do that during your stay. But you definitely can dip your feet down there on the beach in the Hudson Bay. And I suggest you do, because here's another little fun thing for you all that probably several listening tonight don't know. The water of the Hudson Bay is under the jurisdiction of Nunavut territory. So you're kind of sort of cheating a little bit, but really technically, if you put your feet in the Hudson Bay at Churchill, you can say you've been in Nunavut, because the water of the bay is indeed under the jurisdiction of Nunavut territory, and that's the truth. So there's another good shot of that Inukshuk statue on the beach, Leanne standing in front of it on the right-hand side of your screen, everyone. And that's definitely one of the things you will want to take your photo with in Churchill. It's definitely one of the places that everybody likes to stop and take their picture with the big Inukshuk on the beach. And that was actually put up by a local man in Churchill not too many years back, just in 2006, that Inukshuk statue went up. But it's a really popular spot for visitors to Churchill for sure. So yeah, and again, just a good look at the scenery of the beach. And on this slide here, I think we're just about finished, everyone. This slide here we're looking at some of the murals around town. We had a murals project, a murals festival back in the year 2017, and at that time there were 19 murals painted around Churchill. And I have to say, as a local guide, this is something that we really love as guides, because it's a new thing that we get to talk about now on our tours of Churchill. So you're going to see several of the murals that were painted, and they really dress up some of the old buildings around Churchill. I mentioned that military base. Churchill does have this very long history. The military base in Churchill started back in the 1940s. Basically, it was wrapping up by the late 1970s. We even have a rocket range outside of town where weather and research rockets were launched. You're going to see that, but the top, the center photo, the old building with the beluga whales painted on it, that's actually out by the old rocket range. And there are still a handful of buildings, not many, but there are a handful of buildings still standing today that are remnants of that military base that once stood outside of Churchill. So some of these old buildings just standing around the landscape have been dressed up with murals, and they look really nice. It was called Seawalls, the Mural Festival, when it took place, and quite a few international artists were involved, some Canadian artists as well too, some out of Winnipeg, one from Churchill too. So you see different artist renditions of polar bears. Some of the murals are beluga whales, other wildlife. Some of my personal favorites are actually murals of people in Churchill as well too. So and several murals have been added since that time as well. So probably at least 25 murals, maybe a little bit more than that, we're up to now. So it's another
Wow.
we'll see in Churchill. So before I turn it back over to you, Cindy, because I think I'm pretty sure this is my last slide. Just before I do that, I want to share a little quote with you. This is a quote that I often share with visitors. And I found this quote some years ago in Lonely Planet Travel Guide. And there's a bit of a story behind this quote about Churchill. I was actually with a Westworld group on my way home from Germany. And on the way home from Munich, I was killing time in the Frankfurt airport, picked up a Lonely Planet travel guide at a gift shop, opened it up, and that book on Canada with Lonely Planet literally fell open to Churchill. And I was so touched when that happened. And I was so touched by the quote as well that that Lonely Planet writer had to say about Churchill. And I shared it with many people in the years since I found it, and I want to share it with you all now. It goes like this. Churchill lures people to the shores of Hudson Bay for its majestic predators, beluga whales, a huge old stone fort, and endless subarctic majesty. But while the highly accessible wildlife is enough for Churchill to be on any itinerary, there's something less tangible that makes people stay longer and keeps them coming back. A hearty, seductive spirit that makes the rest of the world seem, thankfully, even farther away than it really is. And whoever that writer was that said those words about Churchill, I felt really understood that there really is something about Churchill, something about the North, really, that isn't tangible, but it just draws people in and it makes people fall in love with the Northern community. I know that's what happened to me many years ago, and I have never forgotten in all these years that I've worked as a local guide in Churchill, what a great privilege it is to be a local Churchill guide, and what an absolute gem this little town is in Canada, and how lucky we are to have it. So everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us for the presentation tonight and letting me share about the #1 place that is closest to my heart. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Cindy. Thank you, Cindy.
Oh, thank you, Koral. Honestly, that is wonderful. I mean, yeah, I want to go to Churchill. I have yet to get there, and I'm, after listening to your passion for the North and for Churchill in particular, it just, I want to go. I need to go. And that quote is amazing. It's a beautiful quote.
Yeah, it's
I
good.
think it
Mhm.
it summarizes what you're trying to portray on, or not trying to portray, what you're portraying on on our webinar this evening too. So no, thank you again for sharing your passion and your love and your home with us this evening. So now I want to get to the questions and see if we've got, can answer some questions for everybody watching this evening. Okay. Valinda is asking, what is the average daytime and nighttime temperatures in August? And do they get rain? Do you get much rain?
Good question. So first of all, we definitely do get some rain. You know, I'm thinking back on my memories over the years, all the trips that we've had with Westworld to Churchill. I really can't think of many trips where we had a lot of rain on the tours. So we get some, but not a whole lot. It's certainly not like traveling on the West Coast, that's for sure. As for daytime temperatures, though, usually we're in the teens in the summer. We are definitely getting some warmer weather in Churchill. We were hitting into the mid-20s quite a lot last summer, just in 2021. But more typically is usually mid-teens at that time of the year. That does actually bring me to something I should mention too, which is clothing for Churchill. This is actually really important, everyone. If you're booked to come with us to Churchill, if you're thinking about a tour to Churchill in the future, it's very, very much a casual destination. Running shoes, sport sandals, Skechers, jeans, just comfy pants, and it's all about layers, like any good Canadian, right? It's all about being dressed in layers. So hoodie, a fleece, bring a thin pair of gloves, even the summer for sure. Definitely bring a jacket that's repellent to wind and rain, because being out there in the water whale watching, that definitely can be a bit cool depending on the day for sure.
We also have one question here for you, and I'm sure you're going to know who's asked this question, but they're wondering if there's any sea otters.
That's funny. I do know who's asking that question. I'm so sorry, Ingrid. No, I've never seen a sea otter in Churchill. Seals, definitely seals. I don't feel like seals as much as you like sea otters, but or otters rather, but seals we definitely have, and they're also pretty cute. They really are. So and baby belugas, definitely baby belugas as well. So you'll see calves. You will. You'll see calves for sure.
That would be adorable. I couldn't wait to see a baby beluga. Could they get any cuter?
Oh, I don't think so. Yeah, they're pretty sweet.
Betty is asking if the highway to Thompson has been paved yet.
It is. It actually is paved. Yeah. I drive it, oh goodness, at least a handful of times a year, if not, well, more than that, I guess, really. But yeah, it's pretty good. It is all paved the whole way. There's usually it's kind of like perennial construction. It's quite common to hit one or two areas that are still under construction, which is quite typical, especially in permafrost areas where permafrost is always trying to do damage to the road surfaces. So there's definitely some frost heaves. Those of you listening who have traveled in Alaska or the Yukon or anywhere in the north, you'll understand what I mean about frost heaves. So we certainly have to slow down for some of those. But the highway is actually in pretty good shape, I must say. And yes, it is paved all the way up to Thompson.
Awesome. Thanks, Koral. I mean, if there's any more questions out there, now is the time to submit them. Just type them into that Q&A box located on your screen. They don't have to be necessarily particular to Churchill. They can be questions with regards to any of our tours that we have, or perhaps you might have a question about what it's like when you're on tour. Coral's the lady that can answer your questions. So it's a great time to ask if you have them. And if not, we can thank you all very much for joining us this evening. We are going to follow up with everybody that registered for the webinar, and you will receive an email from us likely tomorrow that will have a link to all the information for this tour. And also, if you've missed any of our previous presentations, we do have them on our website at westworldtours.com. where there is a complete list there of all our previous presentations. They are recorded and you can watch them at your leisure. And hopefully you can join us on May 10th, which is a Tuesday, for Koral again, as we go through the Maritimes. And Koral, again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your love and passion for Churchill with everybody this evening. And we wish everybody a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us.